again?
I'm joining from India.
Okay, what part of India?
This is Hyderabad.
And
Yeah.
what is your institutional affiliation?
It's Indian School of Business.
I see. Okay. Welcome,
Yeah.
Rocky. Wonderful to have you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dalal, can you hear us?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Dalal, where are you joining us from?
From Alabama,
Okay, okay. And what's the institution you're affiliated with?
University of South Alabama.
South Alabama. Welcome, Dalal, also to the seminar.
Thank
We'll
you.
start in a few minutes. Right. Mohammed, can you hear us all right?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Mohammed. Where are you joining us from, and what's your institutional affiliation?
Yeah, I'm from University of Houston in supply chain management. Yeah.
Interesting. And how did you hear about this seminar?
Actually, I received an email from I think Dr. Dr. Lee.
I see. So Chenwei's email. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Happy to have you. Manish, can you hear us all right?
Hello, Mr. Kumar.
How are you, and where are you joining us from, and what's your institutional affiliation?
I'm good. I'm good. Actually, I'm from India and I'm joining from Indian Institute of Management, Lucknow.
Lucknow. Okay. Well, welcome to the seminar. We look forward to hosting you here. Of course, we have Lihua, who's from San Francisco State University. Hi, Lihua. Good morning. And we have Angelo Debu. Angelo, can you hear us all right?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
And where are you from? And is that, hopefully I didn't butcher your name. Where are you joining us from?
Oh, you pronounced it correctly. My name is Angelo Devidu. I go to SF State.
Fantastic. A student here or faculty here?
Yes, I'm a student. I'm studying quantitative economics. I'm doing
Superb.
master's.
Superb. Well, welcome. We're really happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So we have a lot of people joining us. So I think it's going to be we're going to have introductions through the chat now as we are ready to kick off in any minute now. All right. Just as you're coming in, this seminar is being recorded. So if you're not, comfortable, you might have gotten notification as you got in, that it's being recorded. If you're not comfortable having your image on YouTube, because it's likely it will go on YouTube. So if you're not, comfortable with that, please put your questions. Don't speak during the seminar, then your image won't come up, right? If you don't speak on during the seminar and just put whatever questions you have on the chat, I will get to your question that way, and your image doesn't have to be on YouTube, all right? All right. Let's see. Okay, so I think we're getting a lot of people coming in. I think we should kick off. It's 10 a.m. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second seminar of the Responsible Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative at San Francisco State University and Lam Family College of Business. Happy Veterans Day, everybody. I know it's an off day for a lot of people, including for our institution here. So I'm really happy and thankful that you made some time to join us. So welcome, and happy Veterans Day to everyone. So what I'm going to do is skip a couple minutes more for people to kind of slowly get in. So as they're getting in, if you can do me a favor and put in your name and your institutional affiliation in the chat, that would be really helpful for us to kind of see who you are and where you're from and so on and so forth. So go ahead and introduce yourself on the chat. Welcome, Mike. Welcome, Lihua. As you're doing that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Minu Kumar, and I'm the founder director of the Responsible Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative here at San Francisco State University, Lam Family College of Business. And The Responsible Innovation Entrepreneurship Initiative was founded last year. We've been in operation for about a year and a half now. We have a number of different, offerings that we provide for our faculty, students, and also for the public out there and the community. I'm going to note two of them here, just two of those programs that we offered, which would be of interest to this group of people. The first one, you're attending one of those things, which is a seminar, a brown bag seminar for research. And we offer two types of seminars every semester. One is on the domain of responsible innovation and entrepreneurship. In fact, a couple of months back, we had one of Dena Gromet's, today's speakers, Dr. Dena Gromet's colleagues from Wharton, and that was Lindsay Cameron, speak to us about gig economy and business models and gig economies and how rents are generated and captured and so on and so forth. So that was that's an example of a domain type of talk. And, previously we also had Ruby Lee, professor from Florida State University, talk about inclusive innovation, one of the pillars of responsible innovation. So that's about the domain talk. The second type of talk we have is methodology talk. So in the past, we had Don Hedeker, and Don is an expert on multi-level modeling, and so those methods type of talk. So today we have another methods type of talk. In fact, I'm just going to put the website for the initiative, and you can see our initiative information here. Also, we also have a YouTube channel that you can follow from the initiative webpage. We also have our research director here with us today, Ian Sinapuelas. You'll see him in the list of participants. Ian, if you get a chance, can you put a link for our YouTube channel on the chat here, so that people who are interested in our previous talks can kind of see what the talks were before. Some of the speakers don't want them, the talks to be recorded, so we don't have all of them online, but we have most of them online. So you can check out our previous talks also there, right? So that's that about the talks and the initiative. Please check out the initiative. You'll find a lot. We also offer, the second big offering that we have, before I forget, is a conference, an annual conference in responsible innovation entrepreneurship. We did one this last academic year, which was this spring, and that was on responsible innovation. We had speakers like Phil McNaughton, who is the founder, sort of father of responsible innovation concept. He created the concept in the 90s and the 4 pillars of responsible innovation. And we also had, keynote speakers, from such as Phil McNaughton. We also had the founder director of the responsible innovation department for Meta, and founder director of responsible innovation for Google, along with many other panelists and talks. And we also had a paper development workshop with Journal of Product Innovation Management for one whole day. So we're going to do something similar this academic year. That the conference is going to be on April 19th and 20th of 2024. And we have the topic is going to be AI and ethics, so which is very topical at this point. So we have speakers lined up. Our practitioner keynote is going to be Rachel Gillum, who is the VP of AI and ethics at Salesforce. And we also have Rita Katia, who is a Stanford professor who researches AI and ethics. So they will be our, practitioner and academic keynote, respectively. And then we have a number of other panel discussions and very interesting discussions lined up with, including by John Ziegler, Chris McLean, many other talks, relating to responsibility in AI. All right. So please look out for those. We also have as I said, we do paper development workshops with journals. So this year we have a paper development workshop partnership with Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal. It's a one-day workshop, and that's going to be conducted by the Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal editors, Yang Lee and I'm blanking on his name right now, but both of them are traveling on to San Francisco and providing a full-day workshop on any papers, any topic that you might have in entrepreneurship and innovation. So that's about the program, I want to move on to the main show for today. And just before I get to that, I also want to thank Chenwei Li. You may have gotten a lot of emails from Chenwei Li. Chenwei Li is our director for engagement, and unfortunately she's traveling today, and because of which I am hosting this in her stead. Usually she hosts these talks every semester. And I'm thankful to Chenwei for making the introduction to Dena Gromet, Dr. Dena Gromet. And Dr. Dena Gromet, as you know, may have seen from our flyer and this, in our emails, she has a bachelor degree in psychology from University of Pennsylvania. She went on to do her Ph.D. in psychology also from Princeton University. And then she went on to do a postdoc at UPenn, followed by transitioning into a research directorship in People Analytics Initiative at UPenn. Currently, she serves as the executive director of the Behavioral Change for Good Initiative. And Chenwei made her the connection through Katy Milkman that Dena Gromet works really closely with. And some of you may be familiar with Dr. Milkman's work, Professor Milkman's work. And their methodology of mega studies, both Dena and Katy Milkman have used it for multiple publications in journals like Nature and PNAS and other very notable journals. So we're all very excited to hear about this methodology and how it was used and how it was designed, how it's conceived, and so on and so forth. The way this talk is going to happen is we'll have 1 hour, 30 minutes for this talk. And I've eaten up into about 6 or 7 minutes of that. I recognize that. But we'll begin with 1 hour presentation from Dena, and then we'll take questions after. All right. So if you have questions, I know questions come up during any seminar. Please put your questions in the chat, and I will moderate the question QA at the end of the session. Please put in. I know these questions do come up as the presenter is going on, so please put them in the chat, and I will make sure that I go through each one of them. So it'll be about 30 minutes of Q&A. So 1 hour Dr. Gromet's presentation and 30 minutes of Q&A. And I'll stay on for about 10-15 minutes if people want to do some networking low key. So that's about that. All right, so just to reiterate this issue of recording, so we're recording this seminar. If you don't want your image to be captured and put on YouTube, please do not speak. Put your question in the Q&A, and I'm happy to moderate the discussion. Having said all that, it is time for us to kick off the seminar for today. So I want to welcome Dr. Dena Gromet to the stage here at this point. And Dena, welcome. We're all excited to hear your presentation. So I'm going to let you take over from this point on.
Hey, great, thank you. Okay, let me share my screen with everyone. Get into presentation mode here. All right, great. Everyone see slides look good? All right, wonderful. Okay, Minu, thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here with all of you today. As Minu mentioned, I am the Executive Director of the Behavior Change for Good initiative that is led by Professors Katy Milkman and Angela Duckworth. In today's talk, I'll be sharing the Megastudy method that we developed to be able to find out what works for changing behavior at scale. And I'll share some of the things that we've learned along the way, as well as results from 2 of the Megastudies that we've conducted for encouraging healthy behaviors. So I'd like to start off today by addressing the big picture question of sort of why behavior change is important. And one of the reasons it's important is because it can meaningfully change people's outcomes. So one staggering statistic from the health domain is that in the US, 40% of premature deaths are the result of behaviors that could be changed. So things like how much we exercise, what we eat, whether we smoke, all of these things can determine our health outcomes. And so what that indicates is that we have a real opportunity to use behavioral science to help people make meaningful and positive changes in their lives. Now, of course, and I want to stress this does not mean that individual level behavior is the only or even the primary way that we can change people's outcomes. There are many structural and societal level factors that powerfully influence people's health as well as other outcomes. But by focusing on behaviors that individuals can change, it gives us one pathway to find ways that people can make meaningful and positive changes in their lives. So one question that we've been focused on at Behavior Change for Good is how we can best use behavioral science insights to inform policy. And first, we want to make sure that the recommendations that we have based on behavioral science for how to help people change their behavior, that those are based on strong evidence. And ideally, that strong evidence should come from field experiments where we can make causal inferences about what works for changing behavior out in the real world. But there are important limitations of field experiments that we have to consider, even though it is the gold standard. So one is that running field experiments is resource cost intensive. There's a lot of fixed costs to be able to do this type of research. And it takes a long time to do. So it's a long time before you see that return on the investment. It's also the case that when we want to try to figure out, well, okay, which behavioral science insight, which strategy would work best in a given situation, that what we're left with is apples to oranges comparisons across field experiments that are conducted at different time points in different settings with different samples that may even be looking at slightly different outcomes. And so you can't do those apples to apples comparisons to be able to tell, which strategy you should recommend be adopted and where policymakers should spend their resources. There's also the well-known file drawer problem, which is, an issue for many fields, but for field experiments where, they are very expensive to conduct, we may spend sort of enormous resources, right, to be able to replicate findings that of null results where they were not published, right, because null results typically are not. And so we don't get to learn from where others have seen failures. Okay, so what's the solution to this? What can we do? What sort of method would we be able to use so we could make those apples to apples comparisons and be able to address some of these issues? And this is where we think the Megastudy comes in. And it provides us with an approach that allows us to assess real behavioral outcomes on a massive scale, where we're able to look across different interventions and directly compare them to one another. So in today's talk, I'm going to walk through what the Megastudy approach is, and talk about some of the best practices that we've learned from our work along the way. And I'll share results from 2 Megastudies we conducted on encouraging exercise and increasing vaccinations. And we'll then close with some discussions of limitations of this method, as well as some exciting future directions that we see. Okay, so to define what a Megastudy is, I think it's important to start from defining what a traditional field experiment. So in a traditional field experiment, there's a hypothesis that's being tested, and typically sort of 2 study conditions that are set up to be able to evaluate that hypothesis. Now, in a Megastudy, what we have is a very large field experiment in which there are many smaller sub-studies or sub-experiments that are run simultaneously on the same outcome. And so the Megastudy can include many of these sub-studies, right, that are the same as this traditional field experiment, except that it's executed alongside multiple other sub-studies. And so what that allows us to do, since all study conditions are run simultaneously and compared to a common control condition, is that we're able to compare across different studies, right, interventions that come from different studies to see which perform best overall. And we think there are a number of benefits to the Megastudy approach. So one, particularly as compared to the traditional sort of one study at a time approach to conducting social science research. So one is that we that megastudies have the potential to really vastly accelerate the pace of scientific discovery because we're evaluating many studies at once, many hypotheses at once, and we're able to directly compare them. So for instance, like let's say that we had a mega study in which we simultaneously tested 53 interventions from 20 sort of individual sub-studies. So spoiler alert, we did this, and I'll be talking about that a bit later. But if we tried to do those 20 studies sequentially, that would take many years to be able to do, a long time before we see that return on that investment, as opposed to being able to simultaneously run them together in the same mega study. And most importantly, we'd lose that ability to directly compare across those interventions to see which were most effective. And there's, in terms of the fixed costs of doing field experiments, that we're able to sort of shrink those a bit because they're borne by a central organizer. So, one group is leading, and that means for any individual researcher to be able to come in and test their hypothesis, the costs to them are much less than if they were doing an individual field experiment on their own. And it also provides some protection on that investment that you make in doing this expensive field research. And if you come out and the one hypothesis you chose to test, you don't find support for that, right? Here, by testing multiple hypotheses, it's much more likely that there'll be useful insights that come out of the work. Another benefit is that mega studies can be run as a tournament that bring in different disciplines to test their best ideas of how to change a given behavior. So, because typically it would be, okay, there's a study from economists over here and psychologists over here, but we're having the ideas that come from across our scientific team. This is a picture from a 2019 conference, which is our team includes economists and psychologists, computer scientists, scholars from medicine. So all of these researchers are able to propose ideas about how to tackle the same problem from their discipline perspective. Mega studies also have the benefit is that they're ideal really for learning what works for whom. So typically, most individual field experiments are not set up or well powered enough to be able to look at differences or across different demographic groups or based on individual characteristics. So the mega study, because they require large samples to be able to test the many interventions, are better situated to be able to explore whether there are differences based on individual characteristics and whether some interventions are more effective for some groups than others. And also, it sets itself up well to having machine learning approaches applied to the data to investigate what works best for whom. And with regard to the file drawer problem, we can ensure that all findings are published. So when the mega study is published, all of the interventions that are tested are published, even if they didn't show significant, there aren't significant findings for specific interventions. So that allows us to learn both from what we find out is more effective, but also from the things that we find out are less effective. Okay, so I'll turn now to kind of talking about some mega study, what we call best practices, and they're things that we've learned along the way. Of course, we're still learning, and that's part of the fun. But just sharing some of the things that have been important for us in doing this work to date. So I'm going to first discuss sort of best practices related to like the setup of a mega study, right? And being able to do this kind of work. So one thing that's really important here are organizational partners. So these are key because when we partner with them, we are working with them. We work with very large organizations that serve many people, and they're sort of critical to be able to doing this large scale work. And how many participants will be needed for a mega study is going to depend on a number of factors. So, your target behavior and how noisy it is, the type of intervention you're doing, whether it's light touch or heavier touch. So, each mega study in terms of the size of it will depend on kind of the specific question that you're targeting and the types of interventions that you're using. And so with working with partner organizations, it's very important to identify, the target behavior that you'll be looking at, and the scope of the work in terms of, what will be available for researchers to vary with regard to the interventions, as well as the frequency and duration of the intervention. And once you have that information, you're then able to create a request for proposals that can be shared with researchers so they can design studies and interventions that capture, that are capturing the, what the scope of the study is, and they're coming up with their best ideas to fit into what's available, or sort of the sandbox, if you will, for the mega study. And also, in terms of being able to conduct this type of work in which it's not simply randomizing for an A/B test, right? But an A, B, C, D, E, G, going onward. When you have many interventions at once that need to be randomized, it's very important to have a platform that's able to do this. And so in our work, we've done this in different ways. We have created the randomization platform. We have worked with vendors who have created the platform, and we've also used platforms, existing platforms of our partner organizations. So these all have, pluses and minuses to them, but each of them allows to be able to randomize many people to many different interventions at once. Okay, so moving on to study design. For mega studies with the aim to inform policy, it's obviously really critical that the target outcome is both relevant to the policy in question and that it's objectively measurable. So let's take an example of the context of exercise. And here we want to see an objective measure like check-ins at the gym or step counts measured by a device, because that shows the actual behavior, as opposed to sort of self-reports about whether people worked out or not. And that's because, especially when it comes to informing policy, we want to make sure that the interventions that we've tested are actually moving the target behavior and not simply people's reports about that behavior. And it's also ideally the outcome is going to be measurable for every participant, so we can perform intent to treat analyses, so we can understand how effective a treatment actually is when you implement it out in the real world. And finally, a really important point here is that mega studies include a study-wide control condition to which all of the other experimental study conditions can be compared. And this is another place where we've done this in multiple ways, and it can be done in multiple ways. So you can have a holdout control condition in which there's no contact with participants, a business as usual control condition in which the participant would experience whatever the organization typically provides, or a sort of inactive as possible control condition that contains the basic elements of the other mega studies to be able to perform that apples to apples comparison across interventions. Okay, so turning to analyzing data, one thing that there are a few sort of considerations specific to a mega study implementation that have to be taken into account. One is sort of that by definition, the mega study is engaging in multiple hypothesis testing. So this is something that needs to be corrected for. And we, in some of our recent work, we have used Benjamin-Kochberg correction, which allows us to account for the fact that the interventions are compared to a common control condition. Another thing that needs to be accounted for is something known as the winner's curse, and this is, what this relates to is the effectiveness of the highest performing interventions are likely to be inflated when we're looking across all of these interventions, and so that's a bias that needs to be corrected for. In some of our more recent mega studies, we've used the James-Stein shrinkage procedure to correct for this bias among our top performing mega study interventions. And that's a statistical way to handle it, but I also want to emphasize that to really understand the true impact of these top performing interventions that come out of the mega study, having replications as well as extensions of this work in independent samples is really critical to being able to understand sort of the true impact of a top performing intervention. Okay, so next I'll turn to talking about two mega studies that we conducted, and the first one of which was on encouraging exercise. So this was the first mega study that we did, and it was in partnership with 24 Hour Fitness. At the time of the study, this is a large gym chain in the United States. It had 4 million members in 430 US locations. Okay, so a quick stop to talk about here about why we wanted to study gym visits. One is that in terms of policy relevance, increasing exercise is a policy relevant outcome. So not only do we know that it has a number of health benefits, but also at least data in the US is that most Americans are not exercising. Americans are not exercising sufficiently. So this is one reason why this was a good outcome to target. Another was that gym check-ins are objectively measurable for every participant. So it gives us a really nice measure as a way of being able to look at physical activity and exercise that we can observe for all the participants in the study. Okay, so how did we build our mega study? So because the 24 Hour Fitness had such a large member base, we had the opportunity to test many dozens of interventions to see which would work for how often people exercised. And we invited our team scientists to design sort of self-contained sub-studies and to test their best idea about how to do that. And what this resulted in is we had 30 scientists working in small teams, and they designed a total of what ended up being 53 interventions or experimental conditions, and which were part of 20 research studies. And each of these research studies is investigating a different hypothesis about how to increase how frequently people visited the gym. Okay, so to kind of go into what we tested, so we wanted to create a baseline intervention as part of this overall program, and we wanted to make sure that this was based on what we knew from previous research was effective for helping people engage in exercise more frequently. So that included previous work had shown that having people make specific and concrete plans about when they would go to the gym and providing reminders was effective for encouraging gym visits, and also that offering incentives for people to go to the gym was effective. So taking that knowledge, we created this best practices baseline intervention that prompted participants to plan the days and times that they would visit the gym each week, that sent them SMS reminders before those scheduled times, and importantly, used micro incentives to reward people for going to the gym. So people got points that were redeemable for a small amount of money on Amazon, which is an important component to make sure that this is cost effective for being able to implement at scale. Okay, so then what our team scientists did was building on this best practices intervention. They sort of layered on additional active ingredients to be able to test whether those adding on those additional components led to greater exercise frequency. So researchers had the ability to vary the experience that participants had when they signed up for the program, the incentives they were offered during the program, the reminders that they receive for going to the gym, as well as interactive text messages and weekly emails, all delivered over a 4-week period. Oh, and sorry, before I go on to this, I should mention sort of just to give you I'll go into more detail in a bit, but just some examples of the types of things that people tested. There were interventions that showed people and encourage them about thinking about how they could make exercise fun. There were interventions that incentivize people making plans to be able to go to the gym. So just to kind of give you a sampling of the types of things that researchers looked at. And there was also a and then importantly, there was a placebo control condition into which all of these 52 additional interventions or treatments were compared. And in the placebo control, participants received one lump sum payment on signing up for the program, and this was equivalent to the expected earnings in the best practices intervention. And the thought here is that the placebo control allowed us to evaluate the effectiveness of these other interventions, taking into account people's interest in signing up for the program and also receiving an incentive for their participation. Okay, so in recruiting for the study, all 24-hour fitness members were invited to participate in a 4-week program, rewards program, designed by scientists, so they could sign up online for this. And we had a final sample of over 61,000 participants. Okay, so let me walk you through how this study worked. So there was a landing page that 24-hour fitness members could come to sign up for the program. They saw that, they read through, they provided their agreement and consent to participate, and then provided their contact info that would be used in the program. After they had successfully enrolled, they were then randomized to one of the 54 study conditions, right? The 53 experimental and the one placebo control. And participants then learned about the rewards they could earn during the program. They were then prompted to schedule the days and times that they would go to the gym. And after this point is where most of the researchers would insert content specific to their intervention. So to show you an example of what that looked like, in one study, participants were taught about how to temptation bundle, and what that means is that they were informed that they could, that one good strategy for helping themselves get to the gym was just to only do something they enjoy when they were at the gym. So something like reading an audiobook, listening to a podcast, watching your favorite TV show, and that as part of this, they were then given a free audiobook, which they were encouraged to then read at the gym. Okay, and then finally, at the end of the registration process, the participants were just were told they were all set and reminded about what would happen over the 4 weeks of the program. So following that, over the course of the 4 weeks, there was follow-up text reminders about their scheduled gym visits, interactive text messages, as well as emails with their reminding them of that they got weekly, reminding them of their schedule. Okay, so that's the study. So now what I want to present to you are the results. And I first want to orient you to this figure, because presenting results from 53 different study conditions, that's a lot for one slide. So we're going to do our best here, and we'll go into some more detail about specific interventions in a minute. So what you're seeing is you're going to be looking at the regression estimated increase in average weekly gym visits from each of the interventions that we tested compared to this placebo control that you're seeing represented by the blue line. And just as a reminder, in the placebo control, participants only received a reward at sign up for incentives and sign up for signing up for the program. Okay, so these are the results from the 53 interventions. What I first want to draw your attention to is that directionally, almost all of the interventions increased gym attendance over the 28-day program. After we do the BH adjustment for multiple comparisons, we're seeing that 36% of these of the 53 interventions we tested induced people to visit the gym compared to that placebo control. And so I'll point out here our best practices intervention and where that fell. So this reminder, this is people, doing the planning, getting the reminders for their gym visits, and receiving the micro incentives. And you can see then also just how a couple of others fared. So down closer to the bottom, the one I mentioned about encouraging people to make their workouts fun, that was one of our more less effective interventions. But the top performing intervention that we saw was provide an incentive or bonus for people to return to the gym. So I'm going to go through a couple of the top performing interventions to share a little bit more detail about that. Okay, so in this this specific intervention, the design for that was led by John Bashirs, and an economist, and he, in this version of the program, participants were given an extra, what equated to an extra 9 cents if they came back to the gym immediately after they had missed a scheduled workout. And the idea here was to kind of try to counteract that. Not have a missed workout turn into a streak of missed workouts, right? To make it, once they'd fallen off the wagon, make it easy for them or incentivize them to return and come back. And during the 28-day program, we saw that this increased gym visits by an estimated 27%. Another top performer was paying people more to go to the gym. So, you know, a lot of research on the effectiveness of incentives in encouraging gym going behavior, and we certainly saw that here as well, and it increased gym visits again during the program by about 25%. Another intervention that was quite successful was designed by psychologist Bob Cialdini, and in this one it presented participants with information showing that exercise in the US was actually an increasing trend. The more people were doing it than before, and conveying that information led to an estimated increase of about 24% in gym visits during the intervention period. Okay, so this is great to be able to identify sort of which interventions worked best in this setting. But one question about the usefulness of mega studies is whether people could already identify which of these interventions would have worked best, and running, you know, this resource intensive mega study actually didn't really tell us anything over than what we could have known already. So we thought it was important to be able to investigate this and see if people were able to predict what would work. And so to do this, we ran a set of prediction studies to accompany our mega study that examined how well people could predict the impact of the interventions that we tested. And so we had 3 samples here. There was an online sample of lay people who made predictions. We had a sample of about 160 professors from top public health schools, and also a sample of 90 behavioral science practitioners. So being able to see both how lay people and experts evaluated this to see the accuracy of their ability to, of the impact of these 53 different interventions. And in each case, we didn't have them evaluate all 53. That would have been a very long study. So they evaluated a randomly selected 3 interventions from that overall set. Okay, so what we find, for looking first at our online sample of lay people, is you know, a small positive correlation, marginally significant. And what you're seeing here is a correlation between the actual treatment effect we observed on the x-axis and the predicted treatment effect. So that's what people predicted on the y-axis. So one thing to note here is that people are overly optimistic about the impact of these interventions and how much they're going to move the needle on gym going behavior. Okay, so turning to our expert samples. So for the public health professors, there was no correlation between their judgments of our observed effects. And again, you're seeing that sort of over optimism in terms of how effective these interventions will be. And it is a similar story when looking at the behavioral science practitioners. So again, not seeing a correlation between what we actually observed and the judgments of what people thought we would see. So I think these results are important in speaking to the value of mega studies in being able to help inform policy decisions, because we're not great at being able to determine what will work ex ante. Okay, so a few takeaways from this mega study. One is that, I think we saw really nice evidence that behavioral science interventions can reliably increase how often people go to the gym during this 4-week intervention period, and that was accomplished at a very low cost. Which makes them makes this able to be something that can be implemented at scale. We also saw that experts and lay people alike were unable to forecast which interventions would most successfully change behavior, and that on average they are actually over 9 times too optimistic about how much the interventions would lead to an increase in how often people went to the gym. And I think these findings really speak to the importance of the Megastudy approach for identifying what works for changing behavior in a given setting. Okay, so now that we had established this Megastudy method, we wanted to tackle another issue where we thought it'd be useful to test many ideas at once. And unfortunately, along came the COVID-19 pandemic, and that made it very imperative to figure out what would work for increasing vaccinations. So when we conducted this research, it was in the fall of 2020, and the COVID vaccine was not yet available, but was gearing up to be rolled out, which, pause here to say that is an amazing feat of medical science. But there was a huge behavioral science question, right, of whether people would actually, in fact, get the vaccine. And here you're seeing a screenshot of the op-ed that Katy, Angela, and team scientist Patel wrote about this in highlighting the importance of this issue for policy. And there are, of course, a number of different reasons why people might choose not to get vaccinated. In our research, we focused on one question, which is whether people is focusing on the intention action gap. And so what that means here is that there are people who might intend or be open to taking some action like getting vaccinated, but that not all of people who have this intention or this openness end up following through. So we're really focusing on that how to encourage that follow through component. And in thinking about how to tackle this, because COVID vaccinations were not yet available, we thought that flu vaccinations were a good stand-in for this. With the idea that we'd be able to test what works, and that could then be applied to the upcoming COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Okay, so I'll now sort of turn to sharing one of the mega studies that we conducted on encouraging flu vaccination with the goal of informing the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. So for this mega study, we partnered with Walmart Pharmacy and to test text message nudges to encourage flu vaccination in fall 2020. And the way this was set up was that the participants were patients who agreed to receive text messages and had previously received a flu shot at Walmart during the previous flu season. Patients were assigned to one of 23 study conditions. So here we were testing 22 different interventions. And again, we had one control condition. And this condition determined which text messages, or if any, they received, nudging them to get vaccinated at the pharmacy. And these were deployed starting on September 25th. And the outcome of interest was whether patients received a flu vaccination at the pharmacy by the end of the year. And in total, we had over 689,000 participants in this study, which worked out to roughly about 30,000 per study condition. Okay, so what did we test in this mega study? So as I mentioned, we had 22 interventions that, again, we're testing different hypotheses in specific sub-studies designed, again, by 24 scientists working in small teams. To give you a sample of what we tested, there were messages that prompted people to make a commitment to getting a flu shot, others that reminded people that getting a flu shot would help them protect others. And also we had ones in which people were told that the flu vaccine was there waiting for them, and theirs for the taking, that a flu shot was waiting for you. And we compared all of these different treatments or interventions to a business as usual control condition. And this was our mega study wide control in which patients simply just received whatever was a typical pharmacy communications. And importantly, they didn't receive any any study-specific messages. Okay, so we'll ask here, did we increase vaccination rates? So here we'll be looking at the regression estimated percentage of patients that were vaccinated. And again, we'll be comparing those 22 interventions to this business as usual control, in which about 29% of patients were vaccinated for the flu. So first, what you might notice from looking at the results of these 22 interventions, and I think not surprisingly, given that we were both, we had a lot of power to detect effects, and we know from previous research that reminders are effective, that sending reminders for people to, text message reminders to go get your flu shot did increase, how often, did increase vaccination rates, and by an average of about 6.7%. And then to see where some of the things that we tested fell. So, telling others that, you'd be doing a favor for other people by getting the flu shot was one of our more less effective interventions. But our top performing intervention was this one of a flu shot is waiting for you at the pharmacy. And let me show you exactly what the text for that looked like. So patients received an initial text message that told them that the flu shot was available at Walmart, and then 3 days later sent them a reminder saying the flu shot is waiting for you at the pharmacy. And this increased vaccination by 9.3%. And I should mention that this was designed by Noah Goldstein and John Bogart at the time, both of UCLA. And I also should point out that we ran a separate mega study during fall 2020 in partnership with two large health systems, and looking at getting flu vaccinations at upcoming doctor's appointments. And in that mega study, we saw a similar top performing message of saying that the flu shot was reserved for you at your doctor's office for your visit. So again, this type of sort of ownership language of the vaccine is yours, it's waiting, it's reserved, does indicate that is an effective strategy. Okay, so again, we wanted to see, as we did with our mega study on encouraging exercise, wanted to see, could people predict these effects? So we did a set of prediction studies in which participants were recruited to make predictions about the impact of these different interventions. And we had a sample, again, of lay people taken from online sample of Prolific. And then also, this time we had the team scientist who had designed these interventions. We had them make predictions about the impact of each of these on vaccination rates. So first, looking at our sample of lay people, here we're seeing that they were in fact pretty good at making this prediction. And so again, you're seeing the actual treatment effect we observed on the x-axis and the predicted treatment effect on the y-axis. But when we look at the predictions of our team scientists, the scientific experts, we're again seeing no relationship between their predictions and the actual treatment effects that we observed. And one other thing that we can look at in these prediction studies is, could people predict which intervention would be the top performing intervention, right? So the specific question here is like, would people be able to say, oh, yep, it's waiting for you, that's the one that's going to win? The answer seems to be no, in that in both the sample of scientists and in the sample of lay people, they end up ranking the top performing intervention much closer to the bottom than to the top. So again, showing that we're not great at being able to pinpoint, which intervention will be most effective. Okay, so takeaways from this mega study, so saying, ownership language, this reserved for you, this waited for you, does seem to be able to reliably improve the effectiveness of vaccine reminders. And also we saw, sorry, I didn't touch on earlier, but I think important to mention here that some of the text messages were set up to send reminders on multiple days, where others just did it on one day. And we did see that multiple reminders outperformed just reminding people once. So again, more evidence that reminders work. And, again, we're seeing that particularly among experts is that they're not able to predict what will work best. Again, indicating the value of the Megastudy approach for being able to identify what works to help inform policy. Okay, so before I leave here, I do want to close this section by kind of talking about, we were inspired to and hopeful that what we identified would be able to also help with encouraging COVID vaccine adoption. But this is, of course, an empirical question. And we did have one set of team scientists led by Heng-Chen Dai did do a later study with the UCLA health system showing that this type of ownership language was effective for increasing COVID-19 vaccination. And Mitesh Patel also led a replication and extension of this, doing this with health system employees using that reserved for you language. And, I do want to emphasize here how important these replications and extensions and independent samples are, to be able to sort of really understand the impact of these interventions. Replication in general is good, but also here because of the issue of that winner's curse of likely overestimating the effects of the winning intervention out of the that come out of the Megastudy. Okay, so for the last section today, I'd like to talk about some limitations and some exciting future directions. So for the limitations of the Megastudy approach, so of course, we think the Megastudy approach has many benefits, but like any paradigm, it has its challenges. We talked through some of the sort of statistical issues that one has to take into account when doing this kind of work, but there's others too. So one is that running Megastudies at this scale, right? Being able to run studies that have 54 study conditions, 23 study conditions, working with these large organizational partners. This takes funding, this takes time and people resources to be able to execute. And so this infrastructure might not really be feasible for many research groups to be able to implement. But I do think there are opportunities to use the Megastudy approach on a smaller scale as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that to be able to successfully test many interventions simultaneously, we have to impose more constraints on researchers in terms of their study designs than you would if you just were doing one individual study. Some of that is feasibility, but also just from a comparison standpoint is that there need to be some commonalities between different sub-studies to make them comparable. And so, for instance, in our flu shot Megastudy, all the interventions were delivered by a text message, so any effect of them we can attribute to the message, right? But if we had done some via text message and some via postcard and some via email, we wouldn't then be able to, disentangle the delivery mode from like the effect of the messages themselves. So again, those constraints have to be imposed to make them comparable. And also, I talked to you about studies with 60,000, participants, with over 600,000 participants. These are very large sample sizes, and they're needed to be able to run a Megastudy with sufficient that are sufficiently powered. And I think this, this requirement does limit the potential partner organizations that you can work with, and might mean, you have to forgo if you want to run a Megastudy, working with a smaller organization that might be, really would be great to partner with to answer some important questions, but don't have the scale to be able to conduct a Megastudy. And then next, turning to future directions. So there are a few things that we think are really, really exciting. One is thinking more about how to create enduring behavior change. So in the exercise Megastudy that I went through, the impact of many of the interventions we tested, once the program ended, once the intervention ended, so did that impact. And so there's still a lot to learn about what helps create long-term behavior change. And so we think there are some promising avenues to pursue for this. One is looking at longer lasting interventions that go beyond, we did this 4-week step-up program for exercise. Text messages were, 1 or 2 text messages a participant received. So thinking about ways to do longer lasting interventions that, don't shut off and provide more opportunity to encourage behavior change. There's also set it and forget it interventions. So these are interventions in which a particular behavior is nudged at a single time point. So something like setting up a reoccurring savings deposit or installing an energy efficiency thermostat, where it's one choice, one behavior that you're looking at, but it has, it has long downstream consequences that continue to incur benefits. So those types of interventions may be particularly good for setting us up for long-term change. And we also think there's a lot to look and to learn and investigate with regard to doing socially based interventions. So we have, to date, all of our interventions have been delivered to individuals, but by using the power of social groups to help promote change, there might be a lot of exciting opportunity there to do group-based interventions. Another exciting future direction is this understanding which interventions work best for whom. So you may recall at the beginning of the talk, I talked about how one of the benefits of mega studies is is being able to see which interventions work for different demographic groups, different individual characteristics. In our mega studies to date, we have not seen really much variation with regard to which interventions were effective across demographic groups. But I think there's a lot more to learn here, a lot more potential for potentially personalized interventions based on people's individual characteristics and applying machine learning to mega study data to really kind of probe what works best for whom. So I think there's a lot more to be done there. Another, I think, exciting opportunity for mega studies is adaptive random assignment. And so that there we're able to better power to use that to better power interventions that based on early results seem promising. So that is another way in which the mega study method can be used and updated and changed to sort of better and answer different questions. So in conclusion, I think hope shown you today that I think our work to date has shown that mega studies have the ability to accelerate scientific discovery and importantly lead to policy recommendations that are better than what we'd be able to generate based on scientific intuition. And we think mega studies really have a great potential to advance behavioral science and its application to real world issues. And most importantly, I think, is there's just much more to learn and do with regard to the mega study approach. And I'm excited to see in which directions it moves and as more groups are using this approach to really be able to provide scalable insights that can hopefully inform policy. So thank you all for today. And I want to just take a moment to thank all of the scientists and funders and partners that have made this work possible. A big thank you to everyone at the Behavior Change for Good initiative for their tireless efforts. And a big thank you to all of you for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to hearing your questions.
Well, thank you, Dena, for a wonderful presentation. And we all we're keenly looking forward to your study design and all the kind of technical aspects of creating mega studies. So we have a number of questions that are on the chat. So I'm just going to go through each one of them here. We're beginning with Angelou's question. Angelo, did you want to and Angelo is a master's student in our economics department. Do you want to pose your question to Dena right now?
Sure. I was wondering if I think you briefly mentioned this, however, I don't think you mentioned it completely. I was wondering if you use any computational tools to conduct these studies. And well, I was asking about the methodology. However, it seems that you did say the methodology. So if you want to, both questions, most of the first question I would like to know, because these are these studies are conducted, this is a lot of people that you're so using using a program is very helpful on these studies. Go ahead.
Sorry, Angela, so can you tell me specifically what you mean about, can you go into a bit more detail about your question there?
Of course. For example, in some of my classes, I learn tools like R or Stata. And these help economists to have the data, to do mathematical equations with the data, with a lot of data. So let's say you have 60,000 people like you had in your study. You can just have all these data in this computational tools and then run a regression that will help you run these calculations much faster. So I was wondering if there's any tool that you use for these studies.
Yeah, so for both the studies that I presented today, like for the analysis of assessing the effectiveness of these interventions compared to the Megastudy-wide control condition, it is a simple tried and true OLS regression. But I'm curious if there's more that you're thinking about there. But as I was saying, there is a lot of interest in using like machine learning on these data because they say there are so many people and there's potentially a lot to understand about differences across individuals. So I'd say that's ongoing interest of ours. But with regard to sort of the being able to assess the overall effectiveness and take initial, looks at like, are we seeing differences based on different groups, like do men and women respond differently? We are not seeing that coming out of our results to date.
All right. Hopefully that answers your question, Angelou. Let's move on to Fabian. Fabian has actually a couple questions. Fabian, you want to pose both of them at this point?
Yes, thank you so much. I was just wondering. Actually, my question.
Fabian, also, can you quickly introduce yourself? Some of us
Oh,
already know
sorry.
you,
Yeah,
but
of course. Yeah, my name is Fabian, and I'm based in Denmark at Aarhus University, and I'm a Ph.D. candidate in business development and technology at the moment. And my question actually has three parts. The first sort of sub-question would be, I was just wondering what would be the biggest pitfalls in orchestrating Megastudy. The next question is, where does the motivation to conduct a Megastudy come from usually? And the third question would be, if you see Megastudy as an optimal method, let's say, to address grant challenges and wicked problems. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I might come back to you and ask you to remind me about one or two of those. But so we think the Megastudy method with regard to in the realm of sort of behavioral science and thinking about in terms of if your goal is to like apply behavioral science to policy, we think in terms of, the methods that are currently available to us. And for us, it's really saying like, you take a traditional field experiment where you have a single hypothesis you're evaluating. And we think it is an improvement when it comes to, what your recommendations be for policy to be able to evaluate those hypotheses simultaneously so we can look across them to see which are most effective. So yes, we think like with regard to the tools that behavioral scientists use, that this is a very effective method for being able to identify what works for encouraging behavior. And so it's not without its pitfalls, right? Because saying that you identify the top performer from the Megastudy intervention, and so I think you can feel confident like this is from this large, well-powered study, we see that this one has like risen to the top, but that doesn't mean that there should not be follow-up work, right, that really establishes the impact of that effect. So then policymakers can decide, okay, now I have sort of lots of good evidence about what kind of impact I can expect from implementing this, and they can make that decision, then based on that information about whether they can. So I think I answered two things, and there were three. So what did I miss?
Yeah. Actually, I'm not even sure, to be honest.
Okay, all right.
I got your question. The third one was about the wicked problems,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, can you, Fabian, you asked about wicked problems, and are mega studies a way to tackle wicked problems, like the sustainable SDG goals, things like that, right? So is that what you're getting at?
Yes, exactly. Because I'm a qualitative researcher, so it's quite abstract for me to imagine how not anymore, but before this seminar, it was very hard for me to imagine how a mega study can be conducted and orchestrated. So I was just wondering if you see this approach as a way of contributing to solving some of the grand challenges that we are facing as a society.
So yes, I see it as being able to contribute to that, right? But and this is true of not just mega studies, but any study where there's a very large problem, right? And then you identify sort of one element of that you're going to focus on. And that's sort of something I was saying at the beginning of the talk too, that it's, things that we look at, particularly when we're looking at individual level behavior change, we think there's a lot of promise there, but it's not the whole solution, right? So that this isn't that saying like, oh, we can just run mega studies and do this, and then we don't need to do anything else. It's like, this is when we think about solutions that go along the individual level, this is, a tool that we have to use, but doesn't mean it's the only thing that we look at. And when we do look at something, we're looking at one aspect of the problem. So for instance, with vaccinations, right? So there we were focusing on, focusing on follow through, right? So, it's and thinking about like, okay, there's, a segment of people that will be, they're open to getting vaccinated, but it's like they kind of need help getting across the finish line, right? Encouragement to do that. But then there are groups of people who, for other reasons, right, do not want to get vaccinated. And so sort of receiving a text message that reminds you to go get vaccinated is not going to be sufficient to bringing about behavior change. So, it's like, it's helpful in being able to, I think when you've identified like this specific thing, but there's lots of then other, components that also have to be addressed and may not lend itself to thinking about that from like the individual behavior change level.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the answers.
All right, let's move on to Memo. Thank you, Fabian. Memo, I know you have a question about exogenous variables. Can you go ahead and state your question, please?
Thank you very much. It was very, I would say, enlightening and inspirational. I was thinking, like, did you collect data on exogenous variables like age, gender, occupational location, political orientation, and how these variables, influence the outcome or the benefits?
Yeah, so I would say in most of our studies, the demographic information we had things, like gender and location, but we didn't have a lot of other information. So again, like that's another area where there's still in terms of, I do think what works for whom is that mega studies have a lot of potential to look into that, but I think we're still at the beginning of being able to do those investigations, and part of that is having more data on individuals that allow us to look at more factors.
I think Lihua has a related question. Lihua, did Dena address the question, or do you have more to add to? I know it's a similar question to Mahmood's question.
Lihua left.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, that's right. Lihua had a similar question, which kind of ties into a question that I had, and you already brought up this issue in the exercise study, right? The geography is an issue. I mean, the compounds, right, that come up with other like typical studies that we, behavioral studies that we create, we control for these compounds. Did you do that in this work also? And what would the how was the study designed like? Because I noticed in one of the studies you had an odd number of groups, 23 interventions. But typically, when we do this kind of stuff, it'll be an even number, like a 2 by 3 or 2 by 2 or a 3 by oftentimes sometimes you have 3 by 3. But so what was the study design of some of these things?
Yeah, so there was variation in terms of what researchers put together for their individual sub-studies. And so, a number of the studies were just, okay, we have a hypothesis we're testing, and then we have, two study conditions to be able to test that. Sometimes people had 3, right? And that's why, it's not that, because each sort of research team is contributing their own sub-study. It is not, we're not setting it up in sort of that like 4 by 4 or in some way like that. Not to say there's a lot of value in doing it in that way too, but in the way that we've implemented the mega studies, we've done it where each research team is saying, we have this specific hypothesis, we've designed this study to be able to test it, and then that gets basically inserted into their slot, into the mega study. And then we're able to both investigate their specific hypothesis, like self-contained within their study, but also then compare it to like the common mega study control condition.
Thank you. So let's move on to Manish's question. Manish has a question about the planning reminders. Manish, you want to unmute yourself and state your question, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Also, please introduce yourself to the group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Gromet, for the wonderful session. My name is Manish, and I'm from India. I'm a PhD student. My question is that in the examples that you talked about, there was a primary condition. For example, in the first example, the planning reminders and micro incentives was the primary condition on which the researchers could make some changes, right? So my question is, how do you plan? How do you select this primary condition accurately? Is it coming from some previous meta-analytic evidence or something else?
Yeah, so and I would say that having this sort of what we call like the baseline best practices intervention, I would say that's not like every mega study needs to have that. We did do this in this setting as partly because we had a 4-week program that was being delivered that like housed the mega study interventions, and so there needed to be some sort of like basic components of those programs, and we wanted that to be based on best practices from the literature. So there we were relying on past research that had shown in gym settings that one, like incentivizing people every time they went to the gym was effective for getting them to go more often. And then there was more recent work on top of that showing that by having people schedule the specific time they were going to go to the gym and then providing reminders was also effective for encouraging gym workouts. Over during like the intervention period, and even seeing evidence that lasted past in previous studies intervention periods. So we felt that the literature had sort of established that these were basic elements of a program, and so one, like by including them we could replicate them, but also it provided kind of a sturdy base to start from, and then being able to add on a different intervention components.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Manish, you had a second question also, right? Comparing mega studies to, can you go state that also again?
Right. So my another question is related to this. So in essence, mega studies feel like an extension to meta-analysis. For example, let's say some meta-analysis prescribes one thing that can be useful, and then we are looking at sub-optimizations to that thing, right? So, I mean, is it correct, or there are some other benefits to this approach?
Yeah, so I think that it's sort of the like apples to apples issue that I was kind of talking about in the beginning, is that, and not to say like meta-analyses don't have value, but more that what they lack, right, is that they're taking studies that happened, you know, different types of participants in different settings, and oftentimes are not necessarily looking at the same outcome variable. And then you're putting those all together and saying like, these are all close to one another. And it can give us some sense, right? But it's not what the mega studies allow is saying at the same, you know, single time point in the same sample, we're going to evaluate these hypotheses against the same outcome. And so that it's like, that allows us to really be able to say confidently, right, that it's like these types of interventions are more effective than others. In a way, it's very, very difficult to really do. A meta-analysis is like attempting to give you gives you, I think, a ballpark, but it doesn't allow the same precision that a mega study does.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Ian, you had two questions.
Yeah, hi, thank you. It was very interesting presentation. So my questions are more procedural or logistical. So my first question was, of course, I got the impression that you're working with a lot of different institutions, or researchers from different institutions, and while the IRB process is pretty similar across institutions, there are some idiosyncrasies within an institution. Was there a challenge when it came to IRB approval for your mega study? And how did you handle those challenges, or were there kind of checks in place so that you will skirt some of those hurdles that you will face with IRB? So that was my first question. The second question is more, after all the mega studies are done, after all these studies are done, is there an implicit agreement within your group as to how you submit your publications? Because I'm assuming that at some point a mega study would undermine the results of a small study. So how did you manage that, and what were the expectations created for every participant in the study?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. So for the IRB, and this is something where the point about the kind of like fixed costs being borne by a central organizer, right? So we would, as the organizing institution, like we would take the lead on, preparing an IRB protocol and getting that approved. And then we're able to share that, right? Like that protocol with other research teams. And then they can take and, run that through their home institution's IRB. And so that in that way, it's like we take the lead on it. And then, but of course, every IRB can be different. And so but I think it provides it's not like, oh, everybody just figure it out. It's like, we have an approved protocol that you can then go take and go through your institution. So that's how we do the IRB. With regard to this question, and this is really, I think, really kind of key to the mega study setup, and Minu comes back to a point you were making, I think you were making with the 4x4, and I was talking about like each individual researcher is doing that self-contained, or research team is doing that self-contained study. So what the mega study does is, what the mega study is interested in with regard to the publication of the mega study publication is saying, compared to that mega study-wide control, right? How do all these interventions do? And that's kind of the key question, the key focus of that publication. That leaves open, right, individual researchers being able to say, hey, we were investigating this specific hypothesis. These were our study conditions, and here's, and here are the results looking at our specific hypothesis. They can also take that and, they can have a multi-study paper where this is one study. So we've had a number of researchers who have published their sub-studies as separate publications because they're able to still be able to share and investigate their individual level hypothesis.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's very insightful.
Thank you. Vinu has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dena. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I'm Venu. I'm faculty in the economics department here at SF State. And I really loved your second to last slide, which would sort of outlined all the future directions. And I was wondering about, is there some consensus in the behavioral science literature about the efficacy of monetary incentives? So whether smaller, more frequent incentives work better than, let's say, like one cash prize or one lottery after a substantial period of time to sort of ensure that there is long-lasting change and habit formation. And I'm wondering if those effects would vary depending on people who are more price sensitive to smaller rewards, or people who are more who indulge in risk-taking behavior and who would love a lottery in the end, or would indulge in that. Thanks.
Right. Yeah, so I would say that we have had, like, in the exercise mega study, there were interventions that varied what the incentives were, right? So like they supersized the incentives and provided a lot more than what the baseline intervention was providing for each gym visit. There were also studies that incentivized different things, right, that were observable. So saying, like, I mentioned one that was about incentivizing planning. So in that case, participants were rewarded if they responded to text messages that were like, how are you going to get to the gym, this week? And that was the behavior that was being rewarded. We haven't looked within mega studies about doing a lottery versus, right, there are lots of other ways, and just what you said, or there may be individual differences with regard to how effective those are. So there's a ton, as there's so much research out there on incentives. It's not something that we've particularly focused on in our work, but I agree, it's a continued area of interest.
Thank you. Although I think your second point about the peer effects, or socially motivating people, would be perfect for the gym example. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. I have another sort of technical study design sample question. So, how did you determine sample size? For me, I look at the sample size and I say it's really overpowered, right? So with this sample size, I mean, you could establish significance relative to control group always, right? What did they say? You can prove any hypothesis with enough sample size. What are your thoughts? How did you go about thinking about sample size and such? Because in one of them you had 53 conditions. Was it 53 or 54? But the sample size was 65,000, almost 61,000 people, right? So how did you go about thinking about sample size?
Yeah. So for the in the 24-hour fitness one, so people were being recruited, right? So that was we made an assessment about where we were okay, we think we can have this many interventions, but it's a great question because we thought a lot about. So actually in the gym study intervention, we had the way that we did randomization was, one concern we had was we can make a guess, but we have no way of knowing how many people are going to participate in this study. So we developed basically a randomization matrix that allowed us to it prioritized studies at different times. So at any one time, people are being randomly assigned to all of the interventions, but there was at any one time, one sub-study was being prioritized, and the majority of participants were going into those conditions. So that way, if we didn't meet, if we didn't get to the number of participants that we'd need to evaluate all the studies, we wouldn't be left with, okay, we have 53 interventions and we can't evaluate any of them, right? But saying, okay, we have enough power in these X number of sub-studies to be able to investigate them. It turned out that we had sufficient power, in the end with that one, but we tried to set ourselves up so that we wouldn't be able to say nothing if we weren't able to meet the sample requirements. And then, I agree for the flu shot mega study. We had a lot of power in that study. And so I think like that was, one of the points I was trying to make when we were looking at that figure is that like, it's not surprising that we're seeing, that all of these effects are sort of significantly able to vaccinate.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I think the key question to that then is, again, thinking about the policy realm is like, there are significant differences and then there are meaningful differences, right? And so like not all significant differences are meaningful. Like, do we, is this something where it's like, yes, like we, to see a 9% increase on vaccination, like we think that's great and we're going to do it versus like, okay, you got a significant result, but you moved it by 0.5% and I don't see that as an investment.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. So I have 2 more hands raised up. We have Fabian again.
Yes, I'm so sorry if this question is going to sound a bit strange, but my point of reference, as I mentioned, is qualitative studies. So I was just wondering, in my experience, when I go through many review rounds with a qualitative paper, I can notice that the opinions of reviewers can have a substantial impact on how the paper is going to turn out in the end. So I was just wondering, when you have a mega study, which includes a number of different publications that are then compiled into one mega study, if I understand that correctly, do you notice that the reviewers of the individual papers has an impact on the mega study in the end, in any way?
Well, so I'll say in general, reviewers definitely have an impact on papers, right? And I think it's usually for the better. So because right, it's like you have some knowledgeable people reading your paper and saying like, I want to know more about this, or you haven't convinced me about X. And so like you then have to work to be able to do that. And so usually you get a better product in the end. So the way that for the mega study publication, all of the sub-studies, like all the interventions from the sub-studies, like they're published as part of the paper. So it's all one paper for that with like a mega study publication. And then there could be separate publications that are just like, here's a sub-study where we investigate a specific hypothesis and we're just going to talk about that hypothesis. So yeah, I don't know much more to say beyond that, like, reviewers like will give input that will then lead you to, talk more or, do different analyses, to show robustness and things like that. Point you to specific literatures you should look at. So, reviewers can weigh in on all those sorts of things.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Now we have Priyanka as a question.
All right. Hi, Dena. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. My name is Priyanka Joshi. I'm an assistant professor at San Francisco State. And my question was about, I'm a social psychologist by training and was very excited to see this line of work. So thank you again for being here. I was wondering about theory generation and the role of mega studies in identifying processes. And, as a social psychologist, you always think about the process. Is that something that mega studies can potentially address in the future?
So in terms of saying like, we have an effect and we want to understand more about the mechanism underlying that effect. Yeah. So I think where, what mega studies are good at is being able to say, here's a multitude of ideas, right? And here are the ones that in this setting do best. And so I think follow-up studies are what's needed to really like be able to get into mechanism, and also not just follow-up studies, but some of like the specifics, like the sub-studies themselves are set up to answer those questions, right? Because you have then, instead of just looking at these interventions compared to the mega study-wide control, right? We have a specific hypothesis we're evaluating, right? With, conditions designed to specifically do that. So I think sub-studies can speak, can have the potential to speak to mechanism. And then I also think that if it's like, there's like, oh, we find out this is the top performing intervention, you can then do follow-up work that allows sort of the unpacking of the mechanism there. And I know the group that was behind the sort of waiting for you and reserved for you language, like I know they have done a lot of work to try to sort of unpack, well, what is it about waiting for you and reserved for you that is so effective, right? So I think, there's things we can say based on previous literature, but I think, that's where, again, like replications and extensions are really helpful in being able to answer that question.
Thank you so much. And I had one quick question. Have you ever seen a negative effect of an intervention?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the answer is we haven't. So, but anyway, I'd have to go back. But yeah.
All right, thank you.
But feasible, possible. Yeah.
All right, we're at 11:30 right now, so that should be the allotted time for this seminar. But I'm going to leave it open for another 10 minutes if you guys want to hang out and network. And if Dena is available, please stay back. Otherwise, you're all free to, we're done. But if you want to hang out, we can hang out for another 10 minutes. I'll have this this Zoom thing open for another 10 minutes. Again, I want to thank Dena for a wonderful, very informative presentation, which and a method I was absolutely like zero knowledge of before this point. And so it was really educative for me. I'm sure it was for other people. Also, I know I saw a couple comments about opening their minds and to different kinds of studies. So thank you. Thanks a lot for the time and the education today. Thanks, Dena. So I'm going to stop recording at this point. And if you